Welcome to Commander Central episode 253, and today we're going to talk about putting square cards into round decks. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
So I will quickly explain what that means, because as I said that, I realized that's not a very explanatory episode title, is it? When we finally get to the main topic, we're going to talk about cards that seem universally good, but wind up not always being good in all decks. So that's what square cards in round decks means.
When I saw this, I thought about a meme that I saw quite a few years back of there was like 4 people trying to fit a mattress into a Geo Metro. And it showed a picture of like one of the children's toys where it shows like the circle blocks, the square blocks where you're trying to fit them in the right size. And it's like, this is why kids have these toys.
Yeah, there's a good video you can find. I think it was from TikTok originally, but I've seen it on Twitter of like it's like a split screen, and on one side is like a preschool teacher watching a guy, and the other side is one of those old toys that have like it's like a can with a bunch of different shapes cut out in the lid.
Yep.
And you have to like put the circle shape through the circle one and whatever. And like the first one, of course, is putting the square through the square, and she like nods. And the second one, the hand picks up like the triangle one and goes to put it on, and it puts it through the square. And then it grabs like the crescent moon and picks it up and puts it through the square, because every shape fits through the square. And the look on her face becoming more and more horrified as she goes is pretty great.
Well, I suppose if it goes through the square, then hey, it gets in there.
That's problem solving in its own way, I suppose. So. Anyway, now that we're through all of that, how's everybody doing?
Wonderful.
Good to hear. I'm counting down the days till I can go back to the shop and play. We were just talking about that off the air a little bit now that we're all getting vaccinated, and now that it looks like people that are vaccinated can't be carriers, I'm going to be a little more comfortable going here hopefully in the next couple weeks. So I'm excited for that. And we're deep into Strixhaven previews, and we just got another giant gross Simic one I was talking about in our Slack with people, so I would imagine we'll be doing our preview show for that here pretty quickly as well. And Chris and I discussed that a little bit already, Max, but is there anything from Strixhaven that's jumped out at you that you've liked so far?
I haven't paid attention enough. I don't know. Nothing I've seen has really been like, this is super awesome. I don't know. Sure. I think I'm not burnt out, but nothing has sparked me to be like, cool, Strixhaven's here. I want to add stuff to decks or build a deck around something. Nothing's really caught my eye yet.
Well, and the thing I would say is it's not even that I'm burnt out. It's just that not only did we just get off the Time Spiral stuff, doing the Strixhaven spoilers means we got a deluge of all the Mystic Archives, then the Japanese version of the Mystic Archives, and now we're getting Strixhaven, and then we're going to get the Commander decks, like all piled in together, so it's almost like looking at 4 sets simultaneously.
And then right after that, we're going to jump into Modern Horizons, and then
it never ends.
The core set or whatever it is, the Forgotten Realms.
Because
those are going to be back-to-back as well.
It's going to be quite the year for sure. So we will just have to gear up and get ready for it, eh?
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, listeners out there, if you want to reach out to us and talk about how you are handling this deluge of Magic cards being thrown at us here in the last month, how'd you go about doing that, Chris?
Well, if you want to tell us how bad the art on Faithless Looting is, that's the Mystical Archive, you can reach us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can find us on Facebook by searching CMDR Central. You can find us online at cmdrcentral.com, and you can also find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central and check out our reward tiers, such as a Decks You Play series, which I believe will be airing later this week, along with guesting on the show, or just joining our community to chat with us and play virtual EDH. And this week, we want to say hello and thank you to a bunch of new patrons. We want to say thank you to Christian Maluk, Chris Morrow, Nathan Adams, Jim, and Paul Mendoza.
Thank you all very much for supporting the show, new patrons, old patrons, and just the listeners alike. We really appreciate it. It does mean a lot.
Sure does.
So before we get to the main topic, did anyone play any fun games this week?
I don't know if you call it fun, but I guess I did.
Why, what happened?
So last night I stopped by the store just to say hi and whatnot, and 2 of the Pokemon players who actually work at the store now built Commander decks. And they were asking me, like, I need more cards, or I need this, I need that, so I helped them a little bit with that. I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go home and go grab my decks, and we'll sit down and play. This is like 10 o'clock at night, after the store's closed. So I go grab them, I come back, and I set all my decks up, and I'm like, okay, you guys pick our decks, and Phil decided to sit down and play with us, who's our store owner. So they picked one of my decks, and then they picked one of Phil's decks, and it turned out that Phil and I were both playing Super Friends, and that game was just, it was not fun at all. Like, I sat there, I would play a Planeswalker or something, Phil would play one, and then we'd, like, duke it out with our Planeswalker abilities, and then I'd, like, Cyclonic Rift or something, and then we'd do it over. And the other two just sat there miserable. And I was like, next time I'm going to pick my own deck so we don't run into this issue.
Sure, yes.
Sounds like a Rule Zero discussion did not occur.
Well, I just told him to pick the deck, you know. I was just like, whatever, you know, because all my decks are not super powerful. I've actually detuned them enough to play within the 7 to 8 range, so... But
one thing I just did this week, and I don't have all the cards together for it, but as I went through, I was just organizing some stuff, and I came across, I just so happened to have like a little pile of elves that I was, when I was sorting my green cards, the things I was sorting were all elves. And there was like a Marwyn the Nurturer, and a Wood Elves, and a Elvish Mystic, that kind of thing. So I was like, oh, well, since these are right here, so I just started like rifling through my green stuff, and I grabbed another like 15 elves, and grabbed a bunch of forests, and grabbed an Overwhelming Stampede and an Overrun. And once I got it all together, I'm like, okay, you know, there's a handful of other things that'll be good in the deck that I didn't have and that I could order for like $10. So I actually just ordered them online. So I'm just going to throw a 100 card Marwyn and mono green elf deck together that, you know, is going to be a $15 deck or something. But I did this once years ago and I haven't done it since then. I'm just going to bring it with me when I go to the shop next time and just keep it in my bag at all times. For when I run into a new player, I can just give them that deck and then I can let them keep it afterwards if they want to keep their own deck. And who cares? I'm out, you know, $10. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I have my one deck that's meant for new players, but I didn't have it with me, and that's my Demir Mill deck or whatever I have, because the deck's horrible. It's a horrible deck. I mean, there's like me winning so hard sometimes. I didn't have it with me, so I'm gonna bring that with me because we're gonna play again later tonight. So, and be like, this is how you play with new players. You don't play these stupid decks. You play this easy one.
I built a Adriana Captain of the Guard Boros deck, a couple months back, and it's a fun deck. I like playing it, but then the power level is relatively low. Like, it's something I would not mind playing against new players. There's definitely lines in it where, you know, if I get the perfect hand, it can pop off and I can win. But like, it's still a Boros token deck. There's just a limited amount of stuff that you're going to do that's going to be a blowout. So
yeah.
So that one I'm relatively comfortable playing against new players as well. But I thought that elf one would be good to both play, and I can just give it to somebody, which I think is
so be forewarned with the new players out there. I've been keeping an eye on how they're playing and everything like that. The 3 board wipes I play in my deck is not enough anymore.
No, sure, okay.
Because you know, usually each of us, you know, in a pot of 4, you know, we're each playing 3 sets, 12 board wipes in a game. A lot of these people aren't playing board wipes. They're playing like single target removal, and I'm like, oh no.
I was just going to ask, is that an issue more that they aren't running board wipes, or that everybody's still running 3 to 4 and you still need more? But you answered that.
No, I haven't really seen too many board, aside from like, you know, rifts and stuff like that. But, you know, an actual like remove everything from the board into the graveyard type of deal, I don't see a whole lot of anymore.
Well, and you know, when I first started playing, I didn't run many either.
Yes.
So I think that's probably, particularly if you're coming from standard, where, you know, once in a while you'll see a control deck that runs Supreme Verdict back in the day or something, but like by and large they don't play board wipes either. So,
and news for all of our listeners and everything like that, I might have got suckered into building a CEDH deck. So if anyone plays CEDH and wants to play online when I'm finished with it, I'm game to play. I'm going to tell you right now, my deck is Derevi Stacks. So have fun. See you later. I hate my life.
You know, that's kind of part of the social contract when you're playing CEDH, that, you know, there's no crying in baseball.
Yeah, that was because there's like 4 or 5 guys who play it. They also play Modern with us too, and they were like, "Yeah, you should build one. You know, you're all about Commander." I'm like, "Okay," and I'm looking around, and then one of the Modern guys came over and gave me a smokestack. He's like, "I want you to just do stupid things with this," and I'm like, "Okay, I know what I'm playing now."
Yeah, there we go. Derevi smoke. So it's supposed to you have to get like a Winter Orb in there and your Static Orb and everything.
I might have all those cards already because I don't ever play them, so they just like hide in a box. But
well, there you go. Now you have an outlet for it. That's perfect.
Chris has opened his Pandora's box, it sounds like.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so Max, whenever you play your scumbag deck, I'll just play my Stacks deck and we'll see who wins. We can be scumbags together.
That would not work out because you're playing at another echelon above what I want to play at. That's going to be a bad time.
That's even scummier than what Max does.
Yeah.
Looks like I'm going to have to buy one of your t-shirts, man.
So let's jump into the main topic here. You guys ready for it?
Sure. Triangles go into squares.
Exactly. Anything can go in the square hole, apparently. So this was inspired by the Strixhaven card Reconstruct History, and I'll read that card quick. It is a sorcery that costs 2 red and white, and it reads, return up to 1 target artifact, 1 target enchantment, 1 target instant, 1 target sorcery, and 1 target planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand, and exile or Reconstruct History. So that seems really good. It's a potential 5 cards back for 4 mana, and especially in Boros, that is pretty fantastic. And I saw people online already talking about like how that's kind of an instant staple in Boros, and I get why it looks like a good card, and I get why it probably is a really good card in a whole bunch of situations. However, I mentioned my Boros deck a few minutes ago, Adriana Captain the Guard. It has 0 planeswalkers in it. It has 5 creatures in it, and it has 10 enchantments in it, and 11 artifacts. So odds are really good when I cast Reconstruct History, I'm going to have a sorcery or an instant card in my graveyard, and that's it. And that's assuming nobody has hit my graveyard with a Bajuka Bug or has a Scavenger Grounds, or it's just like turn 4 and there's nothing in my graveyard. So while it's a really good card, with the way my deck is built, it doesn't particularly work in that deck. If I want to get stuff back from the graveyard, Finale of Promise or Underworld Breach or maybe Mizzix Mastery would work better for me in that particular deck. So that's what we want to kind of talk about here. We want to talk about cards that are good, but they're not quite like that Swords to Plowshares levels. Like Swords to Plowshares is good in literally any deck that can run it. There's almost no situation where the way you play or the way you brew is going to change the quality of Swords to Plowshares. And we don't want to talk about like the really obvious cards either. You know, Zombie Master is a fantastic card in a zombie deck, but if you're not playing zombies, you don't want to run it. Or, you know, a card that has like 5 red pips in it probably is really impossible to cast in a 5-color deck most of the time. We're talking about like the ones that are a little bit more subtle, like the Reconstruct History card I was just talking about, where how your deck is constructed might make an otherwise really, really good card not quite work in your deck. And this isn't really about the cards specifically. We're just going to use examples that we've came across. It's more about the concept, so people can get to thinking about why some cards that normally perform really well might not perform really well in your particular deck or in your meta or with your playstyle. So Max, do you have one to start us off with here?
I'm going to start us off with one of the best cards in white, and I'm talking Teferi's Protection. So,
oh, yeah.
This is by far a very good card 99.5% of the time. Except when, like me, you run a Brago King Eternal deck where it's all about enter the battlefield effects. I don't run Teferi's Protection. This is the only deck I have I don't run it in because it doesn't trigger all those ETB effects that my creatures or my, permanents have in that deck. So instead, I run stuff like Eerie Interlude or Ghostway or from Strixhaven. So I guess this is the caveat. This is the one Strixhaven card I've seen and I like. Semester's End, because that one hits Planeswalkers now as well. Brings them back with an extra loyalty or something. So I think if you're playing something that cares about enter the battlefield effects, especially in white, so Brago, Rune, any others really, maybe Teferi's Protection, it's great, but maybe you should consider something else like Ghostway, Eerie Interlude, or Semester's End.
Right, so it's not that it's not good, it's that the other ones do double duty. You can use Ghostway to save your stuff, or you can use it to proc extra triggers, or both simultaneously sometimes. And you only want X amount of effects. You don't want to have like 4 of them in your deck. If you have Ghostway, if you have your Interlude, if you have Semester's End, that's probably enough. And it winds up being a case where as good as Teferi's Protection is, in that particular deck, those are better, basically, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I actually, Max, you and I did that trade for that, I think it's the Judge Foil or whatever it was.
Yes.
And I actually cut it out of my Alessia deck for the same reason.
There you go.
Oh, sure, yeah, because that's the same principles there, because so many of your stuff is kind of like Army in the Can that makes tokens when they come into play.
Yep, it's cool.
Sure, that makes sense.
Cool to save everything and all that, but I don't get the extra triggers, and it's more like, well, I'll let them die because I can just reanimate them anyways, so.
Sure, and if you save them, you might as well get extra triggers off saving them, which is what you would get with Ghostway or something. That's a good pick. That's a good call. Chris, what do you have here?
Let's see. I'm hoping I did this one right. I'm going to tell all you listeners, I read all the notes for this, and I started writing stuff down, and the more we talked about it, I'm like, I don't know if I did this right. So the first one I wanted to talk about is any of your extra turn spells. I have seen these in every single blue deck, and I have also seen these 70% of the time turn into a 7-mana, draw another card, and pass the turn card. For me personally, extra turn cards are not a card that goes in every single deck. If you can't abuse them, if you can't use them to the fullest potential, I don't see a point in running a card such as this. Your guys' opinions on that?
I totally agree with that.
Okay. I want to make sure I did this episode right. I was like so worried about this too.
Yeah, no, Chris, I 100% agree with that. I've actually had this debate with myself with my Tuvasa deck, because Tuvasa is a fast deck. I want to kill everybody early in the game, and adding something like Nexus of Fate to the deck, knowing that I draw so many cards, I'd be able to at least loop it hopefully loop it quickly within the deck.
Yep.
But I also, just that thought sits in the back of my mind, like, what if you cast it and then the next turn is a dud and then you just wasted, 5 minutes? So yeah, I always just sit there and don't want to waste people's time on the off chance it's going to do that really cool thing where you benefit from that extra turn and are able to just wipe out the table with 1 or 2 extra turns. So I totally agree. If you don't have a way to capitalize on those cards, maybe don't run it in consideration of everybody else's time in your pod.
Yeah, the way that I look at these is, I'm going to use an example of we'll use your deck, for instance, Max, your Brago deck or something like that, versus my mill deck, which is blue. And I play like 5 extra turn spells in my mill deck. Now, Brago doesn't need the extra turns per se to do, all the shenanigans and crazy wacky stuff. Now, my mill deck is an extremely hard strategy to mill out 4 people. So the more turns that I get, the better off I am to milling out the people before I die, in return from them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense there. I think my most recent blue deck is my Silumgar deck, which is a deck I built years ago, and I've just kind of re-put it back together. Has 1 extra turn spell in it, but the extra turn spell is Notorious Throng, which isn't necessarily an extra turn spell. It's a spell that makes 1/1 fairy tokens with flying for each point of damage that you dealt that turn. So I hit somebody for 6, make 6 fairy free creature tokens, and if you hit them with a rogue, take an extra turn.
Yep.
So it isn't always an extra turn, but when it is, when you pull that off, it's almost always because you've dealt a good amount of damage and you've then made a bunch of fairy tokens. And then with that extra turn, you can attack with those extra fairy tokens you made. So like baked right into that extra turn spell is kind of a kill condition.
Yes, which is what you're looking for with like the extra turns and whatnot.
Right. Yep. So that's a really good example with extra turn spells. Totally agree. Because I've plenty of times I've seen that where someone casts a time orb and it's like essentially a mediocre swing for 4 damage and draw a card and waste an extra 10 minutes doing so.
Play a land, go. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. No, I like that one. So my first example here I'm going to talk about is a card called Drag to the Underworld, and I'm playing a little bit in the mana pip space here, which I mentioned, like if something that costs 4 red wouldn't really probably be easy to cast in a 5-color deck. This is kind of the opposite of that. Drag to the Underworld is a card that was in Theros Beyond Death. It's 2 black, and it says this spell costs X less to cast, where X is your devotion to black. Destroy target creature. So it's an instant for 4 mana that can cost double black mana. Usually, if I'm in black and don't have access to like swords or path in white or something, my kind of primary go-to targeted removal creature spell would be Go for the Throat. It's 1 in a black, instant speed, kills most creatures. It doesn't hit artifact creatures, but I mean, there's not that many in the game, so it's a really good kill spell for 2 mana. However, in my mono black deck, I kind of got looking at things and I was running Go for the Throat, but it kind of occurred to me that Drag to the Underworld, costing with the reduction double black, in a mono black deck, that's the equivalent of 1 in a black. Like, the 3/4 of my lands make black mana anyway, so there's really no difference there between double black and 1 in a black. It hits everything, so I can even hit artifact creatures then. And as for the cost reduction, which you can't always count on in a 2 or 3 color deck, in a mono black deck, if I don't have 2 black pips in play, what am I accomplishing by killing a creature anyway? I am so far behind if I haven't managed to have something stick to the board that has 2 black pips in it, that removing something becomes irrelevant at that point. So that's a card that in a mono black deck, it looks like it looks like the cost reduction might not happen sometimes. It always happens, or it doesn't matter. So that's a situation where I wouldn't run that card anywhere else. But in that one deck, the way that, or any mono black deck probably, that card is really, really quite good. And for 2 mana, one of the best target removal spells you can run.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, even in a 2-color deck, that card would be phenomenal too, because I mean, a lot of times you're going to have double black pips because a lot of the best cards that are in black already have a double black in their pip to cast anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We can throw it back to you, Max. What other one do you have here to talk about?
My next one is a little more situational with 2 mana ramp spells such as Farseek or 3 visits in like an Enchantress deck. I'm using my Tuvasa deck as an example here, and when I built this deck, I really relied heavily on aura land ramp, so your wild growth, fertile ground, stuff like that, because Tuvasa's 3 mana. I don't want to be spending turn 2 or worse turn 3 trying to fix my colors or get enough mana to cast my commander, because it's my draw engine in the deck, one of my primary draw engines. So what I've found is spending the mana on those auras gets me that extra color of mana I may need for turn 3 on turn 2. And it also lets me late game draw a card off of Tuvasa or any of the other enchantresses in my deck, because it's essentially replacing itself constantly. Where something like Farseek, although would fix my mana by getting me my duels or a basic that isn't a forest, it takes up a slot that I can't really get back. It's not drawing me a card off of an enchantress. I don't have a lot of recursion for instants and sorceries in this deck, so it's kind of a one-and-done spell where there are better replacements in the enchantment field to do the same thing. So I guess my kind of point is, if you're in a theme like an Enchantress deck, maybe look at the land auras versus your Farseeks and your Kodama's Reaches, because, yeah, putting 2 lands on the battlefield is nice, but is it really in your theme?
Yeah, I mean, the Enchantress deck is a perfect example. It's not even just drawing a card sometimes. Like, sometimes you have Tuvasa out and Argothian Enchantress and Enchantress's Presence and, something else. So that wild growth you drop in that land is drawing you 4 cards.
Right.
Like that's not infrequent. I've seen that happen before with that deck with you. If it's turn 7 or turn 8 and you draw that Farseek, you're like, okay, I'll get to ramp a land. It's not a dead card. You draw that land enchantment on turn 7 or 8 when you have your commander and an enchantress and something else that can take advantage of it. You don't shrug. That feels super powerful to spend 1 green mana to ramp yourself and draw 3 cards.
Right.
So no, and yes, okay, occasionally you're going to get blown out when someone casts an austere command and names enchantments and your lands would have survived and your enchantments don't. But I would dare say for every time that happens, you've put yourself in a fantastic position by drawing multiple cards off it. Like the pros, I would say, in that kind of deck definitely outweigh the cons.
Well, thank you.
So yeah, good call. Chris, what's up next for you?
So I lumped these 2 cards together because they're very similar in their aspect of what they do. They're both artifacts as well, and that's Silent Arbiter and Ensnaring Bridge. I've actually seen Ensnaring Bridge in quite a few decks lately. Silent Arbiter I haven't really seen too much of, but I've noticed that in these decks, especially with newer players, the only way that they usually win is by combat damage. And these cards
Hey, what's wrong with that? What is wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, like that's what they're most reliant on.
Gotcha.
And these 2 cards actually turn off that combat step for you, because you can only attack with 1 with Silent Arbiter, or in Ensnaring Bridge, they can only attack if they equal the cards in your hand. Well, a lot of times, in Commander, unless you're built like a heavy, hard card draw deck, you're only down to like 4 or 5 cards, so your big beaters don't get through with Ensnaring Bridge anyways. The other thing with these is a lot of people don't build in removal for these cards. Now, I play both these cards in my Mogus deck. I also have removal for artifacts in that deck, so I can destroy my own if I need to attack type of deal. The other thing is that these decks are not built for these cards. Like my Mogus deck, for instance, because I want to keep relating this to this, I don't attack a lot. So I want these cards out there, and people need to realize that, yes, they are super powerful cards in other formats. When it comes to Commander, they're not as powerful as what you think they are.
Especially if your deck isn't built specifically to take advantage of them.
Yeah.
Well, I believe, Max, we had a situation, I want to say it was at GP Milwaukee, where you and I were in a game, I think, where someone dropped an Ensnaring Bridge, and it basically stalled the game for everybody, including the player who played it.
I think I know who that player is too.
I don't remember who it was, but I think it was a listener.
It's Andy Zupke from Scrap Trawlers. I believe that was our first time playing with him. And yeah, I remember that. He dropped an Ensnaring Bridge, and that game stalled for like an hour or two.
Including him. It kept him from winning. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because another good way to relate this, Dana, is to your Veil of the Nightclad deck. You're playing all these artifacts, but you don't play either of these cards because,
I don't.
While they could be value with an artifact deck, they don't fit the synergy or the strategy of your deck.
Yeah, totally. That's a good call. I've got a couple here I'm going to lump in together just under counter spells, even if they're for different reasons. I talked about mana cost last game, and it's really, last segment, and it's really obvious, hey, if you're playing a 4-color deck, maybe True Conviction, as great as it is not a card you want because it's really difficult to hit triple white sometimes. You tend to not think in those terms in a 2-color deck. For example, I always just assumed if I was playing counterspells in blue, I would run counterspell, like the original alpha counterspell. Double blue counter target spell. It's neat, it's clean, it solves almost any problem. It's a fantastic card. And hey, you're playing 2 colors. How difficult can it be to get double blue mana? Unless you're playing a Sphinx deck where 1/3 of the cards in that deck have double U in the cost.
Oh, gosh.
Let alone, I think there's 3 or 4 Sphinxes that have triple blue. So that deck's mana cost makes it really, really difficult to leave blue up for a counterspell if I want to like protect myself after casting things. Multiple times I found myself getting burned with a counterspell where I had it and I had to like make a decision like, oh, I can't cast the Sphinx or I won't be able to leave blue up. So as obvious as it, like as simple as it seems like it would be to leave double blue in a 2-color deck, it isn't always. And that was a deck where it actually burned me multiple times. And I assumed that would just be the only time it ever happened until I built my Kedis and Crom deck. And it happens for a different reason there. In that case, I don't think there's anything in the deck with double U in the casting cost aside from Twin Cast. The problem there is the way the deck plays, I oftentimes want to cast like 4 spells in a single turn on an Alpha Strike, which means I don't have double blue many times available to protect that Alpha Strike. I don't even have 2 mana many times available to protect that Alpha Strike. I need my counter spells in that deck to cost a single blue mana or be like a Pact of Negation, because I'm just going to be tapped out or close to tapped out when I do that like final hit. So I've stumbled across a second deck where counterspell was genuinely difficult to have mana for while I was playing it. So it's not just something that's limited to decks with high color count. 2-color decks, sometimes I would pay attention to that because it winds up being an issue more often than you think.
Yeah, I've actually been telling people a lot with like the double casting costs, like regular just counterspell or other things like that, to look at how their deck is built. Like, we'll take your Kedis and Crom deck. You know, you're relying on your creatures more, so why not play a negate or something over top of it? You know, because you want to stop the spell base from destroying your board compared to other creatures. You're just like, whatever, my creatures are just better type of deal.
And I've absolutely had situations where someone drops a Crater Hoof and I'm holding a negate, and you're like, oh no. But for every time that's happened, there's been twice as many times where like having the negate only cost a single blue made a big difference. So yeah, I mean, occasionally it's going to burn you, but in the end, yes, I'm running negate in my Sphinx deck, and I'm not running counterspell for that exact reason. So
yep, Arcane Denial, best counterspell in Commander, in my opinion.
For sure, no, but like really, I have years ago I didn't run it, but like I've learned to appreciate how useful it is to counter a spell and
replace itself.
Only have it cost a single blue.
Yeah, it replaces itself, and your opponent gets cards too. You know, which we don't like doing, but I'd rather replace my card plus stop something and not be as taxed on my mana.
Sure. And especially like maybe if you're playing control, you don't want it because you're planning on like eking out a win over 15 turns or something.
Yep.
But like if your deck is relatively quick and you're not playing control and you only have a handful of counter spells that are used to like absolutely save yourself from losing the game or save your win, then you don't care if they draw 2 cards next turn. You're not planning on them being around long enough for it to matter.
Yes.
So Max, back to you. What else do you have here? Chris, do you have any other examples here for us?
I have 2 more, and one of them we've talked about a lot, and it is probably, in our opinion, that we've discussed this, is probably the biggest, circle going into a square peg thing, or square going into a circle peg, however we're doing this. And that card is known as Brainstorm. This card is a phenomenal card draw spell in every format other than Commander, in my opinion. Due to the simple fact that we don't have quite the outlets that other formats do of shuffling away those cards. Granted, yes, you could be playing every single fetch land in your deck if you want to. All that, and this would be work for you wonderful. Or you could be playing the 1 mana white enchantment if you're in blue and white land tax where you get lands and you can shuffle away. You also don't have people thought seizing you or duressing you or anything like that, so you don't need to hide information. So for 1 mana, draw 3, put 2 back, which could, might just hurt you in the long run. Why not play something different? Like my personal favorite are cards like Preordain or Serum Visions or something that lets you just straight up draw for 1 mana, plus you get the Scry or something else on top of it. So, I mean, that's where I'm trying to go with this one is, there are better 1-mana spells, even though this one is phenomenal, that could replace this in every blue deck.
This is a really interesting pick here. I agree with all of what you said, and I will just quick relay my Brainstorm experiences. I first started playing Commander, and I didn't run Brainstorm. I just ran a bunch of giant X draw spells because I can,
Blue Sun Zenith for 500.
Exactly. Why would I want to draw 3 cards and put 2 back when I could just draw all the cards? And then I got to be a little bit better player and understood the rhythms of the game. And Brainstorm is an absolute it's considered the key card in Legacy.
Yep.
It's called the Brainstorm format. So I'm like, well, obviously I want to run Brainstorm, so I put it in a bunch of my blue decks. And now here we are, me having been a veteran Commander player and having, going on almost 10 years now, I would say, I've been playing. I don't play Brainstorm. I think I played it in my Talrand deck because it's a cantrip functionally. I don't play it anywhere else.
No.
For that exact reason. I tend to play 2-color decks, so I only have really the 1 fetch land for that deck, maybe a Prismatic Vista. Maybe there's a land tax in a white deck or there's something else, but the amount of shuffle effects I have in my deck are so few that Brainstorm functionally winds up being a, draw 1 and what else is coming. It's not a bad card, but I'd rather cast Ponder most of the time if I'm going to do that, or use Search for Azcanta or something.
Yeah, because the thing I don't like about Brainstorm is a lot of times that I've ran into it in my decks, I draw, I'm searching for something, draw 3, and then I'm stuck with 5 lands in my hand. I'm like, I guess I'm drawing 2 more lands the next turns. I guess that's just what's happening. There's nothing I can do about this.
Well, or you're at that point, you're like, okay, I'll keep these 2 lands. Oh, and there's a Brainstorm, so I can definitely draw down and find that 3rd one. Well, you put the 2 lands down, you Brainstorm, you find that 3rd land, but you're not going to get one for 2 more turns because it's in the top.
Yep.
Whereas at least Ponder, you get the shuffle out of it if you don't see what you want to see.
Yeah, that's why I like the Serum Visions and stuff, because it allows you to scry. Yeah. So you look at it and it's like, oh, I do not want these scrying to the bottom,
Yes.
Granted, you are playing 100-card decks, you might not ever see them, you don't have a shuffle for that neither, but I'd rather get rid of those cards so I can get digging into more of the deck.
And Brainstorm's a good one to reiterate. It's a great card. Almost all the cards we're talking about are great cards. But just because a card's great doesn't mean it's great in every single deck.
Yes.
And that's a good example. If you just don't have ways to shuffle and you're not taking advantage of the cantrip and you're not trying to find one of a bunch of combo pieces, because I get why CEDH players play Brainstorm. There's a ton of combo lines there and they just need to find it, and digging down 3 cards for 1 mana really helps with that. But if you're not playing that way, you just wind up locking yourself a bunch of times.
Yeah, because a lot of times you could just Brainstorm into 3/0 mana rocks and just jam them all down
exactly.
and cast another spell, and Yeah.
Max, throw it back to you. Do you have anything here?
I do. I want to talk about Aetherflux Reservoir.
Oh boy.
And I think this is a great card for this topic because I see people fall into the trap of this card because, you can pay 50 life and deal 50 damage to target creature or player, but it also says whenever you cast a spell, gain a life for every spell you've cast this turn. And I've seen this in people's decks where this is kind of their only form of life gain in the deck. And I think the issue is if you're going to run Aetherflux Reservoir, you kind of already have to be on the path of a lifelink or life gain in your deck. You have to have some good chunk of it in your deck. I'm not saying your entire deck has to be it, like my Regnincroft deck or my Dramoka deck, but you can't rely on just this unless you are maybe a Storm deck and just popping off instants and sorceries on every one of your turns, or maybe you're playing an Elf deck and you can run out, 10 elves in a turn and then blast someone away. I really think if you're going to consider Aetherflux Reservoir, because in EDH you start at 40 life, so I can easily get 11 more life, we'll go 50 plus 1, and then blast someone. Well, you also have to figure out how are you going to get back out of, single digit life total once you blast someone for 50. So I definitely think this is a card where you have to not build around it, but make sure you are equipped enough to run it, and it's just not a dead card on the board where you're only gaining 1 or 2 life a turn off of it because you cast 2 spells a turn.
Well, I will tell you my experience with Aetherflux Reservoir. When I built my Vito the Dusk Rose deck, there's a ton of life gain in it. It's built around gaining life.
Right.
So I assumed Aetherflux Reservoir would be great in that deck, except for I don't cast multiple spells per turn. So the only way I gain life in that deck, because so many of my spells are X spells, it's mostly a big black mana deck that's using the big black mana to cast spells that gain a bunch of life that then triggers with Veto. Because the way that works unless I was already at 60 or 70 life from casting a bunch of those spells, there was really no way to roll the life total up. And if I got my life total up high enough from casting big giant X spells, everyone was dead. Like I could there was never that equilibrium where I was at a high enough life total to use it and needed to use it. If I got my life total that high, I was in a position where I was so far ahead, or I got to 70 life by killing somebody to win the game.
Right.
So that was my experience with it. Yeah, I think it's definitely a card where you need to look at how you're going to interact with it way more than I think people realize.
Yeah, I do believe that the biggest trap about that card that catches people is that we play in a format where you are at the 40 life, like Max said. So you look at that card and you're like, oh yeah, I just need that extra life. So, I mean, and this card can just go in any of them because, it'll build itself up, which it really actually does not.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say a similar card that reminds me of that is Approach to the Second Sun.
I have a deck that plays that. It is extremely hard to play that card.
But it's a really, really good card, and it seems relatively straightforward. You cast it, put it 7 cards on the top, and the second time you cast it, you win the game. That seems very easy to hit, very clear, very, very obvious what you want to do, except you probably need to be in a deck where you have enough control over the situation where you're going to survive enough turns to draw it again, or you need to have a way to get down to it very quickly, because if you're planning on casting that and just hoping you're still around in 7 turns, I'm going to tell you that's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's like Call of Duty. If anyone who plays Call of Duty, Warfare, or Warzone, like I do, or anything on here who's a listener, that's that moment when you're sitting there and you take a pop shot at someone, and then you look again and you see 4 glints turn your way off the sniper scopes. That's exactly what happens when you play Approach.
You are in the crosshairs for sure when you do that. So yeah, it's that card becomes much more subtle once you realize, like, oh, I need a way to do something, because 3 people is not 1 person. 3 people taking me out is a whole different deal.
Yes.
A new series of cards I will mention. So we got the Court of whatever cards in Commander Legends. Court of Bounty would be one, which are all enchantments that give you the Monarch.
You picked the worst one of them all, too.
Yeah. And if you have the Monarch on your upkeep, you get a bonus in addition to whatever the card does.
Oh, yeah, that card, yep. But for the Monarch, it's end step where you draw a card.
Yes. So you always get to draw off it. And then if you hold the Monarch till your following turn, you'll get some kind of a bonus off the card. But they all do something anyway. Yep. So Court of Bounty, for example, you can put an extra land into play in your upkeep, and if you are the Monarch, you can put a creature from your hand into play. So that's a pretty big bonus. And I think it incentivizes you to have a way to keep that Monarch, but I would also say that this is generally true of any Monarch card. Monarch is a really cool mechanic. It does add a little bit of chaos to the game, but it also, I think, kind of speeds things up. But I also think it's not something you want to just run if you don't have a plan to consistently keep it. I think casting something and then immediately losing it and not getting it back feels really, really bad. And I've seen those cards, the courts in particular, but other Monarch cards in decks where, like, looking at the person's deck list, I'm like, you're never going to keep that Monarch. You've got, 13 creatures, so not that many blockers anyway, and none have flying. So, like, someone makes a 1/1 white spirit and they take the Monarch from you, and if they have any blockers, you are never going to get back through and get it back. So that's one I would talk about too. The Monarch is a super cool mechanic. I like it a lot. I think people don't think through enough how they are going to hold on to that Monarch. And I think this is true a little bit of Planeswalkers, although at least Planeswalkers, you get the effect when they come down. Sometimes it's really powerful. Maybe you don't care how many turns Elspeth Sun's Champion sticks around when you can drop her and make 3 tokens. Like, that feels like it's probably worth your 6 mana fairly often anyway.
She's a 6 mana board wipe.
Or board wipe with her, whatever. Like, that one is, but not all of them are that powerful or have that many abilities that you can immediately use for value. And I've seen the same thing. I've seen people with like 2 Planeswalkers in their decks that don't necessarily do anything that amazing, and I know they have no way to protect those Planeswalkers. So they're going to drop it, get like 1 card draw trigger off it or something, and then have it immediately die to anybody who's playing a dragon or a Sphinx or an angel. And then I'm like, was that worth your mana to have that in your deck if you can't protect it? So I think that's true of both of those things, both the Monarch and Planeswalkers. I think you should definitely have it in your mind what you can do to keep those things safe if you're going to play them.
I agree with that 100%. I know I play Monarch in 2 decks, in Mogus and Alesha, and both of them are stapled on cards that have other effects.
Yeah.
Now, Alesha, I play the white dude who comes in and exiles a creature or whatever, but it's an ETB effect. So that's playing off my ETB theme, all that. And Mogus, I play Court of Ambition, which is the black one, which, pings someone during the upkeep, So I'm still building 2 theme, but the Monarch's just a bonus on top of it. And honestly, what I see about the Monarch is if you're already built into theme with it, and you play a Monarch, it doesn't matter if it starts rotating around the table, because then it just makes the game more enjoyable for everybody.
Right. I run the Court of Grace one in my Jero Super Friends deck. What's really nice about that is at the beginning of your upkeep, you create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So assuming I have some way to protect it at least one turn around the board, then the Court of Grace is making me a spirit creature token with flying as a blocker to further protect the Monarch and my Planeswalkers on top of that. And it's giving me a flyer to use to take the Monarch back.
Yes.
So if somebody else happens to get it from me, I'm still, every turn, as long as that court's in play, I'm making at least a spirit. It makes it easier to bring it back as well. So that one, I think it's a little bit easier to be sloppy with. But yeah, it's something I would pay a little closer to attention than I think some people do.
Agreed.
Yeah, for sure. So the next one I want to talk about are cards like Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time, which both have Delve, and I guess this applies to Delve in general as a keyword. These 2 cards specifically, though, are great because they put stuff, they let you draw cards by delving away your graveyard, but you have to have a graveyard. So if you aren't doing something proactively to feed your graveyard, you aren't taking full advantage of these delve cards, and I definitely have seen that happen. I've seen people hardcast a Treasure Cruise or a Dig Through Time because they could only delve away 1 card or no cards because someone just Bajuka Bogged the turn before, but they needed to draw those cards. So it definitely is something you need to pay attention to is your deck putting enough things in the graveyard at a good enough pace to make it so the delve can consistently hit. Maybe you don't need to delve the entire cost, but a good chunk of it. So if you are playing more of a permanent heavy deck, that might not happen versus more of a Spellslinger type deck.
True. Yeah, I have 2 good examples about that would be, we'll take for instance your Tuvasa deck, which we just discussed. You're playing more of the enchantment theme, over like your Farseeks and stuff like that. So you're not having the spell base in there, so you wouldn't play those cards. Now, if we take Dana's Talrand deck, for instance, which is playing all sorts of cantrips, of course he's going to have, like 10, 12 cantrips in his graveyard that he can just delve away to cast a Treasure Cruise, which is yet another cantrip that hits and then spits something out.
And that's the one blue deck I have where I'm running both Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time, because I consistently have enough cards in my graveyard to delve away to cast those for cheap.
Yep.
But my Sphinx deck, I don't routinely have enough stuff in there consistently enough to have them fire off, so I don't run them there. Yeah. And my Sphinx deck on top of that is running Rest in Peace.
Yes.
So in addition to worrying about somebody else hitting my graveyard, I have Rest in Peace there where I'm just hitting every graveyard all the time. And that's when I was running Treasure Cruise in there, that happened on more than one occasion where I had Treasure Cruise in the deck and I had Rest in Peace out and I would top deck it and go, oh no, that feels real bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something to take a good look at your deck list if you are playing them and see exactly, how many times, take a note of it. Because if you can minimize the cost by 4 or so, because what does that put you at? So 7, 8, so 4 puts you at 4 mana to draw 3 cards isn't bad. That's the same thing as the other 4 mana blue spell. That's not bad at all. But if you're only paying 1 or 2 out of Delve, then I don't think it's worth it whatever.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. One last one I will mention here before we wrap things up was something that I saw mentioned to me by an old friend of the show, Luke Witten, who Max and I actually used to do a podcast with years and years ago. He had an Angus Mackenzie Super Friends deck.
Oh my god, I loved that deck. That
was a very cool deck. And I remember one time we're looking at something with his deck, and I asked him why he wasn't running Swan Song. 1 mana counterspell. It's going to, stop board wipes. It's going to stop a lot of bad things from happening. It's a fantastic spell. And he pointed out that he didn't have any flyers in his deck. So, because of the Super Friends theme, he found himself, he said multiple times when he had Swan Song, he would cast it to stop something bad from happening, but the next turn, people would start nugging his planeswalkers with that swan.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, you want to counter my spell? Guess what? I'm going to take your planeswalkers out with this little bird you gave me.
Right, yeah. So he said he was better off using the negate or the arcane denial kind of things and spending 1 more mana, but not having to worry about giving somebody a 2/2 bird that could hit his planeswalkers in the face every single turn.
That makes sense. I don't play Swan Song in any of my decks now that I think about it.
Well, and see, now here I will give you the opposite version of that. Talk about that Silumgar deck I just put together, and the way Silumgar works is whenever you attack with a dragon, creatures your opponent control get -1/-1 for each dragon that's attacking them. And it's not attack, that isn't a damage trigger. So in that deck, yes, a swan would serve as a blocker for any of my flyers or dragons. However, as long as I have just 2 dragons in play, the swan is dead before it even has a chance to be a blocker. Just as long as I turn 2 things sideways, the swan's gone. So that's an example where the swan becomes even less relevant than it would be somewhere else.
Yeah, and don't take it that we're saying Swan Song's bad. It's just key decks. I do love that Luke brought that up because I never really thought about it that way. But yeah, where if it's that detrimental to you, it's worth it to play a worse card overall. If you look at the cards side by side.
Yeah. All right. I think that is going to wrap up our Square Cards and Round Decks show. I hope that was interesting. This is much more of a concept show than it was talking about specific cards. The cards we talked about were maybe a little bit less important than just trying to think about situations where cards don't quite work right or do work better in a certain deck in ways that aren't necessarily super obvious on the face. If you have any good examples of cards like this, feel free to reach out to the show and let us know. I am Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDR_Max. And you can find Chris at Wise Squishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him on the Twitter birds at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We will be back next Thursday with another show. Until then, I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.